I use a dating site to hopefully find a decent person to go out with and try to make connections. This dating site sadly has a lot of duds and very few decent folk available on there. However, I remained optimistic and kept going back to check messages and things. I received a message from a normal-looking guy who seemed to have a lot of good things going for him. After a bit of talking, I felt really comfortable giving him my personal phone number, something I rarely ever do. We talked on the phone and found we had many things in common. Both of us were nerdy, and had some form of collection of nerdy things. At that point, I really wanted to meet him in person. So we set up a day to go out for some brunch at a local place. He told me he was excited to meet me, and I told him that I was excited too. On the day of the date, we had our lovely brunch and talked about various things. He was an extremely tall guy, and built like an ox. It was almost a little intimidating, but I do like me some tall guys, so that didn't bother me much. After some time talking, he got a text from his mom asking him where he was at and that she needed him to come help her with his dad. He told me after the conversation with his mom that his dad was not doing well and was basically in hospice care at home. I gave my condolences and said it was fine to cut the date off short so he could go take care of his dad. I even told him I'd like to see him again sometime soon when he was able to, which he felt the same about. As we left the restaurant and I headed for my car, we ended up stopping for a short time and conversed just a little longer, but then, all of a sudden he asked me if I wanted to feel him. I was taken aback by what he said and asked him what he meant. It was so out of nowhere that I didn't think he meant his groin. I looked around nervously from the parking lot, looking to see if there was anyone nearby that I could flag down for help. Sadly, there was no one, and so my attention turned back to him. Afraid of what he might do, and him waiting there expectantly for me to touch him, I shakily reached my hand and tried to aim not directly upon his crotch. Then I announced, "Oh yeah, ahaha, sure can feel it." I laughed nervously and lied, but then he forcefully grabbed my hand and brought it to his groin. Thankfully, I still didn't feel it as I still kind of aimed offset. He asked me if I felt it now, and I lied once again and said yeah, I felt it. I was so afraid, and was at a loss for words. He towered over me like a skyscraper. If he wanted to, he could have easily lifted me up, put a hand over my mouth and shoved me into his car without breaking a sweat. To cut the awkward silence, I said, "Well, I better go now." He said goodbye and left to go to his car, and I torpedoed into my own car and locked the door as soon as I sat on the seat. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel and headed home, glancing into my rear mirror to make sure he had not followed me. When I got home, I washed my hands thoroughly, even though I didn't actually touch him. Just the thought of it made me sick, and washing my hands made me feel at least slightly better than before. After that day, I never texted him back or answered his phone call. Now, here's where things got more scary. So, I knew what his name was, and he had mentioned what his dad's name was, but on my own I discovered what his middle and last name happened to be. I then used his full name to look up any sort of criminal report or any information I could obtain about him. I needed to know everything, especially if he was a criminal. The first thing I saw with his full name was an article about a woman whose body was found on the side of the highway in a sleeping bag or a black bag. As I read the article, I noticed certain names being used. First off, his name. It matched. Then later in the article, after reading about what he had done to the woman, they had a portion where the journalist spoke with his parents. Then his dad's nickname came up, the same name he told me his dad's was. To seal the deal that this was the same guy, was that the dates and his age matched up. He went to prison for only 10 or less years. When he got on the dating site and talked to me, he must have just gotten out of prison about a month before. It all hit me like a ton of bricks at once. I just went on a date with a man who killed a woman, and he never told me. Had I known beforehand, I never, ever, would have gone out on a date with him. I would have never given him my personal number. Since then, I've hoped he hadn't searched for my address. Suffice to say, I rested uneasy for months since discovering his crime. This happened to a friend of mine. One night we were talking about some deep shit and he brought up a time that he was dating a Satanist. I asked him why they quit dating and he proceeded to tell me this story. So one day he was over at her house and they were chillin' in her room. They started talking about religion and other stuff, like when she mentioned she was a Satanist, he previously didn't know, and she could do shit with Ouija board. He thought she was just trolling at him and laughed it off, so she was like, "No, I'll prove it," and got this board out. He still thinks she's playing, but suddenly she takes off her clothes and obviously stuff happens. So right after they finished she says, "That was step one. By the way, sexual activities are often used before satanic rituals." He still thinks she's playing and starts laughing, so she pulls out the board again and asks him, "Who do you want me to summon?" I forgot what he said, but I think Napoleon or something. She then lights these candles and proceeded to say something along the lines of, "Move this, I know you can hear me." He swore on his life that it moved, and then and there he realized this wasn't a joke. He told me he was petrified when he saw this. So he falls on his knees and starts praying. He's Catholic, by the way, and he said the candles for the ritual went off. She gets mad and runs out the room. Long story short, he leaves her after that. I'm a 19 years old college student, and earlier this past year I decided to create a Grindr profile because why the hell not? I'm single and I may as well be a dumb college student while I'm a dumb college student. My friends and I were studying late one night in their dorm room like always. All of my close friends lived together in the dorm, so their lounge was the primary hangout spot. It was a little after midnight and I went on Grindr. At this point I had been on the app for about 2 months and had gone on a fair amount of dates by this point. When I opened the app, one had received a message from a guy. I don't remember his name, so I'll just continue to refer to him as the guy. I clicked on his profile and it was a pretty cute guy. He had a shirtless picture, which is common, and he was attractive enough for me to get more information on him. His caption read, "In town for work." I read his bio and he explained that he was in town for work, that he was staying at a nearby hotel, and was able to host visitors there. I replied to his message and began the typical Grindr talk. "How are you? What are you into? Can you host?" etc. After talking for about a half hour or so and exchanging pictures, we agreed to meet. I must say that I did not get any indication that this guy was a catfish or I was talking to someone who wasn't who they said they were. It's usually pretty obvious when someone isn't who they say they are. That's what I told myself, at least. Whenever I decide to meet up with a guy, I always tell one of my friends and then share my location with them. I do this and then I head out. The hotel was about 10 minutes away from my university. As I was driving there, the guy messaged me and asked, "Hey, so my business partner might come back soon. Would it be cool if we did stuff in your car?" Not an unusual request to engage in car play, but I did start to be a bit suspicious. Why would his business partner be out this late? Yet again, here I was out this late, so I brushed it off and continued making my way to the hotel. I arrived to the hotel and I would say it was about 1 a.m. at this point. I looked at my phone again and I had received another message from the guy. He said, "Pull around to the back of the hotel." I drove into the parking lot and made my way to the back of hotel, past the pool. This is when things started to get weird. As I pulled into the back of this hotel parking lot, I noticed a guy in a red hoodie in between some cars, assuming it was the guy I had been messaging. I pulled into one of the spots underneath a light post, about 20 feet in front of a dumpster that sat in the corner of the parking lot. By this point, the guy in the red hoodie had gone out of sight. I instinctually clicked on the button to lock my doors. I checked the app and received another message from the guy that said, "Pull back next to the dumpster." I assumed that since I was underneath the light, he was worried that we'd be caught if a guest or hotel staff saw us. At this point I started to get a bit sketched out, but I figured that maybe my anxiety was just getting the best of me. I put my car into reverse and pulled back next to the dumpster and put my car in park. At this point I'm scanning the parking lot for this guy and don't see anyone. No sight of the guy in the red hoodie either. I feel my heart rate suddenly increase and I begin getting cold sweats. Maybe I shouldn't have driven out here, I remember thinking to myself. Then I checked the app again and I received another message from the guy, turn your car off and get into the back seat. Okay. It is at this point that my fight or flight response kicked in because, without thinking, I immediately turned my car on and hauled us out of there. I sped out of that parking lot as fast as my poor 04 car could go. I didn't even stop to check for incoming traffic when I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the main road. I drove about 2 miles up the road away from the hotel and pulled into a McDonald's parking lot. At this point I'm trembling, but I'm thinking maybe I just overreacted. I checked the app again to see if the guy messaged me anything. I was expecting a WTF, and the messages from guy were gone. I'm assuming he blocked me, which leads me to believe that whatever he had planned was not good at all. Was he trying to jump me? Steal my car? Or maybe something worse? Needless to say, I deleted the app after this incident. To everyone who uses any sort of dating app, be careful who you meet, where you meet, and just take precautions. Our parents told us never to talk to strangers for a reason.